Afghanistan is, of course, always on the agenda. And the news from Afghanistan is certainly better this year than it has been for some time. But we know, of course, that the press and international attention is pretty fickle, and there is a tendency to follow the latest agenda. I think those of us who understand a little of Afghanistan know that, as the General is often quoted as saying, that counterinsurgency is all hard all the time, and nothing can be taken for granted. And so although there has been some progress, that progress is necessarily fragile, and an update on that and a sense of that is very, very important. I won't try to go through the biographical details of General Petraeus. They are in the handouts in front of you, but you'll see what a distinguished combat career he's had. About 18 months ago, I did an interview with Prospect magazine with David Richards, as he was General Sir David Richards, as he was leaving the CGS position before it became CDS. And at the end of the interview, I wanted to ask him a personal question. And I said, General, in these days, how do you feel about being a soldier? And he gave me a pretty inspirational answer. He said, when I look back on my combat career, I realise that both directly and indirectly, I've saved quite a lot of people's lives. And that makes me feel pretty damn good about my profession. And I thought that was an excellent, excellent answer. And I think if you look at General Petraeus's biographical notes, you'll see that that is written in spades, as they say, a man who directly and indirectly has saved an awful lot of lives. But he's here today as part of his mission as a higher commander. You'll know that he's commanded in Iraq. He's been the commander of CENTCOM. He's commanding in Afghanistan, of course, and he is the author, the prime author of the American counterinsurgency doctrine, which has turned around a lot of thinking in the whole American military. I don't know how often, General, you are compared to Tina Turner, but as far as I'm concerned, when we think about the higher command, you are simply the best. General.
Well, I've had many interesting introductions over the years, Michael, and I must say that that is one that I will treasure forever, and I will report to my wife post-haste about the comparison to Tina Turner. Good morning to all of you. Thanks for the warm welcome. Thanks indeed for the kind introduction, and thanks for the invitation back to RUSI. It is always, truly always a pleasure to be with RUSI Nation. We have made this a routine now, as I was mentioning to His Royal Highness upstairs. Every time that I have testified before Congress in the United States as the commander in Iraq, most of the times at CENTCOM, and now as the commander in Afghanistan, we have returned to theater via London and only via London, and have reported out to your leadership, as we did yesterday, indeed including even to the Queen, as well as to the Prime Minister and the ministers and the great General Sir David Richards, and then we come over to RUSI. There's a reason for it, and the reason is the very, very special partnership that we have with your soldiers, with your diplomats, with your aid and development workers. It's something that we take very seriously. It is something for which we have enormous appreciation. I do appreciate your recalling the number of times that I have been here in recent years. In fact, 3 of those, I think. Actually, it may be more than that, Michael. We might have to check your math here. And not that I'm competitive or anything, but I hope that there's no one that has any more appearances. If so, we'll race back here again. You know, the response when someone asks you, you know, and a young soldier says, well, General, how many pull-ups can you do? And you always say, 1 more than you, big guy. So if there is anyone who has done as many, I will stand ready to continue the effort here. In fact, the truth is, I was wondering if I might not be approaching sufficient stamps on my loyalty card, as they say, to earn honorary membership, or at least a RUSI t-shirt, you know, something like that. It's wonderful to see such a great audience, a number of distinguished journalists here with us today, academics, policymakers, practitioners, and certainly an honor to have RUSI's president, His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent, here with us this morning as well. Along with a number of other old comrades and longtime colleagues, General Sir John Kisley, comrade from Bosnia and Iraq, former MI6 Director Sir John Scarlett, and I had a great chat upstairs before this. And the truth is, as you look at an audience like this, as you read who's in it, you could almost start to feel a little bit important. And whenever that tendency hits me, I recall a story that is appropriate for such times. It's from about 20 years ago when I was the aide to the Army Chief of Staff in the Pentagon, and General Colin Powell was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And on one of those days, one of my fellow aides overheard the Joint Chiefs killing time while they were waiting for the arrival of a foreign dignitary. And the topic of conversation turned to examples of true importance, what it really meant to be truly important. And after a bit of bantering, one of the chiefs offered what seemed to be quite a good opinion on this. "In my view, chiefs," he said, "true importance is a meeting with the President of the United States in the Oval Office, during which the President asks all of the other attendees to leave so that he can do a one-on-one just with you." Well, all the chiefs nodded at that, but then another chief chimed in. "Actually, chiefs," he asserted, "true importance is a one-on-one meeting with the President in the Oval Office, during which the President is so intent on what you're saying that he doesn't even answer the hotline when it rings." Well, that had all the heads nodding in agreement until General Powell, a man who had, of course, as the National Security Advisor, spent quite a bit of time in the Oval Office, settled the question once and for all. "Chiefs," he said authoritatively, "true importance is a personal meeting with the President in the Oval Office, during which, when the hotline rings, the President answers the phone, holds it out, and says, 'Here, Colin, it's for you.'" Well, you know, as always, thanks for laughing. You know the deal. When you reach my station in life, you're only as good as the material they give you. Now, some of you might recall back in September 2007, Ambassador Ryan Crocker and I stopped in the UK and at Russi en route back to Iraq after our congressional testimony. At the time, I mentioned that our appearance in London a few days after that testimony was more than one of mere convenience as a stopover. We believed it was rather an obligation that we owed to the United Kingdom, our most trusted and most important coalition partner. The same is definitely the case today. It's an honor to report to your leadership and your citizens on the campaign in Afghanistan, and especially on the exceptional service of your nation's sons and daughters. Indeed, the performance of your men and women in uniform in Afghanistan continues to be truly extraordinary. Your conventional and special operations forces are maintaining a very impressive tempo of operations in Afghanistan. British trainers serving with the NATO training mission in Afghanistan are providing expertise in the critical mission to help develop the Afghan security forces. And your leaders and staff officers provide incomparable expertise to virtually every headquarters in ISAF. The men and women of 16th Air Assault Brigade are now concluding their third deployment in Helmand Province, having brought extraordinary skill, experience, and professionalism to our operational main effort there. And I might note that I visited some of your wounded warriors, including some who had served with the 16th Air Assault at Headley Court yesterday, and it was a privilege to do so. In fact, you go there, as I went to Walter Reed Army Medical Center and Bethesda Naval Hospital in Washington when I was back in our nation's capital, thinking that you're going to impart some energy and buck up morale of individuals whose lives have been changed forever by wounds sustained on the battlefield. And the truth is the opposite, that one always leaves inspired by those individuals who have had huge additional rocks added to their rucksack and who are driving on with enormous fortitude and courage, and it is they who give us energy rather than the other way around. Now, the truth is that some of ISAF's best leaders come from the ranks of the British military, from Deputy ISAF Commander Lieutenant General James Bucknall and his predecessor, General Sir Nick Parker, to Major General Phil Jones, who currently leads our Force Reintegration Cell, a critical element of the effort, as we recognize that you cannot kill or capture your way out of an industrial strength insurgency, you must reintegrate as many reconcilable members of the insurgency as you can, and Phil is doing a wonderful job in that regard. And then Major General Tim Evans, the Chief of Staff of the ISAF Joint Headquarters, another huge contributor. The bottom line is that your men and women in uniform and your diplomats, led by Ambassador Mark Sedwell, among others, the NATO senior civilian representative, and your aid and development workers have played invaluable roles in Afghanistan, performing their missions with enormous initiative, creativity, determination, and courage. It's clear that the British contribution in Afghanistan is of signal importance to the overall effort. It is absolutely indispensable. And this morning I want to share with you much more about the status of and the way forward for our mission in Afghanistan. But we thought that what we might do is start it by a simple conversation which Michael has agreed kindly to moderate. Now, I'm well aware that all of you are desperate to be PowerPointed within an inch of your life in a briefing by another U.S. Army four-star general, noting, of course, that in our Bill of Rights or whatever, we have a little codicil, along with freedom of speech, that U.S. Army four-star generals are entitled to express their opinions with the aid of PowerPoint. And we've also found this now in the NATO Charter. Now, many of you may not have seen that before, but it is there. So you won't get away scot-free today. I do have some slides loaded up to help illustrate various points that may come up in the conversation, but I won't start it off with a briefing. So, and with that, Michael, why don't you start off with the first question?
General, thank you very much indeed. Yes, we always say that there's either PowerPoint or there's mouth only, but this will be mainly mouth, which is pretty good. So we'll take some questions. I know there's some press in the audience. I'll try and start with some of those people. We'll do a sort of question and answer straight, and then we'll start to group up some questions, and we've got a fair amount of time. Please identify yourself when you speak, please, and because of the acoustics in this room, you will need a microphone, and there's a couple of microphones available. So who would like to begin? Yep, sir. There's a microphone just coming on your left-hand side here.
Thank you very much. Adrian Croft from Reuters. I was wondering, General, if you're concerned that the Libya operation will divert resources and focus away from the Afghanistan campaign.
The short answer is no. There was an examination of whether certain intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets of actually quite limited nature might be needed to help out with the operation in Libya, but in the end there have been no assets taken from the effort in Afghanistan, and I don't foresee that happening at this point in time.
Okay, other press comments, first of all. So, David Loyne, sir.
David Loyne from BBC, good morning, General. Do you believe that President Karzai is serious about reconciliation with the Taliban, and at what level? And how will it go forward?
I do believe he is serious about reconciliation, and if you look at his speech yesterday, I think you see that in there quite prominently. Also, I should note in that speech yesterday, and of particular relevance to this audience, is that Lashkar-Gah, the capital of Helmand province, of course, was included as one of the 7 provinces and municipalities in which transition will commence in the months that lie ahead. This is the so-called first tranche of areas to be transitioned. It will be followed every 6 months by subsequent tranches. It's significant that this first tranche encompasses some 20 to 25% of the overall Afghan population, the bulk of that, needless to say, in the Kabul province that is one of those to be transitioned. But it's significant because Lashkar-Gah is an area in which your task force Helmand has done some very intensive and superb work. And again, it's an area in which there has been a civil military effort, an effort that included very substantial security activities, but has also been complemented very importantly by the activities of DFID, by your diplomats, and also by USAID. And the governor there is quite proud. Governor Mangal is very proud of the inclusion of Lashkar-Gah in it. It was something that we did recommend, needless to say. The Afghan NATO, the Joint Intical Board, as it is called, the Transition Board. And so again, I think something that UK citizens should take pride in as a milestone in terms of progress there. With respect to reconciliation and reintegration, there's no question about the seriousness of the Afghan government or President Karzai about this. It has taken some time to develop the Afghan High Peace Council and the other bodies to oversee this, but frankly, as you look back at it, it's impressive how rapidly they have developed. The fact is that it was only last June, I think it was, that they had the large peace jirga. There were subsequent steps taken, the selection of the head of the High Peace Council, former President of Afghanistan, Rabbani, and all of the various committees, the structures, the executive secretary of it, and so forth. And now there are provincial peace councils in most of the provinces, and there are some 700 or so individuals, former Taliban, who have officially gone through all the steps of the process of reintegration into society. There's another 2,000 or so that are in various stages of the process, and we think there's another, again, couple thousand that have literally gone to their homes and laid down their weapons. Now, that is reintegration. It is not reconciliation with the high-level leadership of the Taliban or some of the other movements that are causing security problems for Afghanistan. But there clearly is a desire by President Karzai and the High Peace Council leadership to reach out to them. There have been various efforts to do that, various strands, if you will. There have been some responses, and this is something that we'll have to see how this plays out. There's no question about the encouragement from your Prime Minister, from my President. You heard it in the speech by Secretary of State Clinton a couple of weeks ago. So there's very strong international support, and there is indeed a very keen desire by President Karzai and Afghan leadership indeed to reach out to these individuals and to begin constructive discussions that could lead to reconciliation of substantial parts of the organizations that are causing such problems for Afghanistan and the Afghan people.
Thank you. Richard Norton-Taylor. So there's a microphone just coming on the right-hand side.
General Richard Norton-Taylor, The Guardian. Could I ask you how things are going to play out, you reckon, the conflict in Kandahar and Helmand between now and the late summer, when, and then will there be a possibility of some withdrawal of British and US troops from there, in your estimate now?
Well, let me, and you know, I also reserve the right to stroll around a little bit here. And you've got to provide some challenges to the camera crew back there. Let me go ahead and call up a slide or two that might help you understand what we expect the Taliban to do this year, and what we also then in turn will try to do ourselves. But first I want to actually tee up something for you to provide some strategic context. We, first of all, should really start at the beginning, because what struck me when I was back in Congress, back in the United States, and even being here yesterday, is that it is important periodically to recall why we went to Afghanistan and why we are still there. And of course that really is summed up best by just reminding us of 9/11. That is where the 9/11 attacks were planned, when al-Qaeda had a sanctuary in Afghanistan during the Taliban rule of much of the country. It is where the 9/11 attackers received their initial training before going on to Germany and US flight schools. It is a vital national interest to my country and to virtually all of the 48 troop contributing nations that such a sanctuary not be reestablished on Afghan soil, or really anywhere else, frankly. And to do that, though, to accomplish that mission, to achieve that objective, clearly Afghanistan has to be helped to develop the ability to secure and to govern itself. Now, we're not trying to turn Afghanistan into Switzerland in 10 years or less. This is an effort to help Afghanistan develop adequate capability, indeed, to secure its territory, to prevent the return of transnational extremists like Al-Qaeda, and to ensure that it can see to the needs of its people so that insurgents and others can't play on inadequacies and regain control of parts of its territory. Now, it's important to recall that we really only recently got the inputs right in Afghanistan. Secretary Gates and others have talked about the various stages of the effort in Afghanistan, how we focused intently on it, took down the Taliban, and then diverted our attention and obviously quite a bit of our resources as we carried out operations in Iraq. I will tell you that having done an assessment in Afghanistan on the way home from a second tour in Iraq at the request of our Secretary of Defense at that time in September 2005, it was clear to me then that the Taliban were beginning their comeback. Indeed, that they had reestablished some infrastructure, a degree of momentum, and that continued over the course of the next 5 years. And it is only last year that we were able to really halt that momentum and to reverse it in some very important places. When I talk about getting the inputs right, I'm talking about what's depicted on this slide right here. And this shows where we needed to make improvements. The fact is that when I looked at Afghanistan very intently upon taking over as the Central Command Commander coming out of Iraq in late 2008, I realized that we just didn't have anywhere near the organizations that we needed to carry out a comprehensive civil-military counterinsurgency campaign, which is what is required, again, to help Afghanistan develop the ability to secure and to govern itself. There was no 3-star level operational command. The commander wasn't dual-hatted as the U.S. 4-star. There were individuals reporting directly to me at CENTCOM right out of theater, bypassing him. We didn't have a sufficient train and equip mission. We weren't doing adequate work in the rule of law arena. And now you may say, well, why is the military in that? What's that all about? What that is all about is dispute resolution. This is a vital need for people in villages and districts and so forth. You must help them resolve disputes. The locals must help them do that. And so this includes traditional law as well as the more formal law. And that's something that we're working on. In fact, we have a great guy, an Oxford First kind of fellow, Brigadier General, who is overseeing that effort. Again, this is where Major General Phil Jones, UK, is. If you don't want to kill or capture all the bad guys, and you can't, you need to reintegrate as many reconcilables, yet we didn't have a cell like that. We also, by the way, didn't have the concept for it, as you can see down here. So we need an awful lot of big ideas as well. Didn't have sufficient unity of effort with our special ops. We didn't have fusion cells, which are absolutely critical. You know, there have been numerous breakthroughs in intelligence in recent years. There have been breakthroughs in signals intelligence and imagery intelligence with the proliferation of unmanned aerial vehicles. There have been breakthroughs in measurement intelligence, as we talk about it with hyperspectral optics and various others. And then the ability to digitize human intelligence, dump it all into massive databases. But the real breakthrough is in the fusion of the products of these different disciplines. And we've built massive databases, first in Iraq, and then we built one in Afghanistan, in which we can manipulate all of the data over time and develop the kinds of actionable intelligence that is necessary. It's a war of ideas, but we didn't have an info-ops task force, and we weren't addressing this very critical element here. We now have brilliant Brigadier General H.R. McMaster, late of IISS, with all due respect. I'm sure he spent time over here as well. But he is taking on that task in partnership with our Afghan colleagues. And I can talk more about that in President Karzai's clear recognition and action on the concept that criminal patronage networks, think about that term now, these are individuals breaking the law, they have a degree of political connection, patronage, and they are part of networks, not just acting as individuals. These organizations threaten the very institutions to which we need to transition tasks over the process of transition between now and the end of 2014, when, of course, we want to have completed that process of transition. So this is organizations, got to get the right folks in charge of them, the right staffing for them. Got to get the big ideas right. Again, we didn't have what you would arguably say is a true CivMil campaign. We didn't have counterinsurgency guidance that was adequate. In fact, here I augmented that with counterinsurgency contracting guidance. The fact is that if the counterinsurgency guidance says that money is ammunition at a certain point in a fight, a true statement, it's in the counterinsurgency field manual after all, if money is ammunition, the contracting guidance says you have to put it in the right hands. And we have had to do a much better job of that. We didn't have sufficient intelligence focus on that. This is intended to reduce civilian casualties to the absolute minimum. It has achieved progress, but clearly there needs to be more done. The United Nations report notes that, according to their information, which we agree with, a reduction of some 20 to 21% in civilian casualties attributed to ISAF and Afghan forces last year in 2010. But again, as a recent episode 1 in particular has reminded us, we absolutely must do better in that regard, and we will not stop trying to do that. We even needed to tell ourselves how to drive properly. We were worse than Toad in The Wind in the Willows. We made more enemies driving to an engagement than we made friends at the engagement. That's not the right counterinsurgency math. So we had to work on all these. Again, obviously reintegration, working how to do night raids appropriately. They're critically important. And then we had to get the big ideas right for transition as well. And then this is the Afghan local police idea. Perhaps most important, the sheer resources. So since early 2009, the addition of some 87,000 or 90,000 ISAF forces, about 70,000 of those U.S., triple the number of U.S. civilians, among others, over 1,000 all told of all countries. Additional this funding here for the U.S. military, very, very important source of funding that could total as much as $1 billion this year. Overall, some of this is jointly administered with USAID. There's a portion of that to support reintegration, and then the rest is the traditional small projects, average somewhere around $17,000 per project. This is an element of that. And then we got the funding for the additional Afghan security forces and a very substantial increase in a variety of different persistent intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platforms. For example, towers with optics, blimps with optics, and then, of course, more manned and unmanned aerial vehicles with various optics on them as well. Now, by getting the inputs right, you can conduct a comprehensive civil-military counterinsurgency campaign, as is depicted on this next slide, which we call the Anaconda slide. These are the bad guys. This is what they need. Next. Next. There you go. This is what they need to maintain the momentum that they had until sometime last year. What we need to do is use every tool in the kit box to deprive them of this, to take it away from them, to challenge them for it. Next. That takes kinetic ops. Obviously, it takes targeted, intelligence-driven special operations. It takes conventional forces to clear the enemy of areas. This is not enough, just the sheer CT force ops. You have to take away important safe havens like Jari and Panjwai and various districts in Helmand province and so forth. Kandahar is where Jari and Panjwai is, and I'll get to that portion of the question. You want as many Afghan forces, needless to say, and you need local solutions so that you can mobilize communities with appropriate safeguards to ensure that you're not just codifying warlord militias. These are under the Ministry of Interior, paid for through the Ministry of Interior, and so forth. They're vetted, they have biometric data, they're trained by Afghan police and U.S. Special Forces and so forth. That's not enough. you also have to do politics. Next, that does include reconciliation, reintegration. It also includes support for governance that can achieve legitimacy in the eyes of the people. Next, intelligence, critical element of this, needless to say, and as I highlighted, the really key piece of this is the fusion of the products of intelligence. Next, you've got to get in the corrections and detention business, helping the Afghans with their correction service, ensuring that ours is the kind that we are actually proud to have the ICRC and others visit. We've opened every location there, including our Special Mission Unit holding facility. Next, as we did in Iraq, obviously basic services of a variety of different types are critically important, the so-called non-kinetic components. Next, there's a regional element of this, and then finally you have to compete in the marketplace of ideas. Now, that's what we have been executing, and as I said, we only got the inputs right in this regard sometime last fall. Needless to say, as we were working on getting the inputs right, we also worked to turn inputs into outputs as we were going along, and that enabled us to make the kind of progress that has been achieved. If you go to what we think the insurgency wants to do this year, to that slide, and then I'll get to the actual Kandahar and Helmand and so forth. Now, as you look at Helmand right here, of course, and as you look at Kandahar, the insurgents have lost very, very important districts, including, as I mentioned, Jari and Panjwai right here, Jari being Mullah Omar's hometown, Arghandab, and now Maiwand is being solidified, so you link up the Kandahar security bubble with the central Helmand security bubble, further work here by our forces, and again, the Taliban wants to reverse all that. They want to regain these areas that were of such importance to them, but they will have to do it without owning those areas, needless to say. So in some respects, as Secretary Gates has said, they'll be playing an away game this year rather than a home game as they have in the past. If you go out into the areas southeast of Kabul, Kabul being right here, of course, where every one of the different groups wants to try to carry out high-profile attacks, and where, touch wood, over the last 9-10 months there has really been quite good security. I saw somewhere a comparison that I think there's, probably the press should verify this, but I saw a report of a comparison between Baghdad, even now, after violence has been reduced 95% over the height of violence during the surge, and it is still a much more violent location per capita than is Kabul. One reason why Kabul is going to lead the way in transition. Down southeast of that, the Haqqani network and the P2K area, Host Paktika Paktia, wants to increase its influence, regain its influence. It sustained quite a bit of damage to its leadership in there. Similarly out here, and then you do have this very mountainous, rugged region of Kunar and Nuristan, where various groups might look for safe havens, particularly if they have an increasingly difficult time in North Waziristan, where you have al-Qaeda senior leadership and other groups that are transnational in their desires, at the very least. And then you have areas in the north like Kunduz and Baghlan, Balkh, over here in the Badghis, Gormash area, where the Taliban was able to increase its influence in recent years, but where it has also, again, sustained some significant losses, and at the very least had its momentum halted, and arguably in a number of those areas reversed. So that's what they want to do over the course of this year. They have sustained significant losses. They will not come at us, we don't think, in such large attacks as they have in the past. Because they've sustained such losses, they will employ attacks against soft targets. They'll try to carry out assassination campaigns and so forth. And then next, what we have to do, of course, is the opposite of that. We want to solidify the gains in Helmand province, Lashkar Gah leading the way with transition there, move from the clear and hold to the actual build, and then now the transition phase, while also still expanding here in the Sangin area, getting up to the Kajaki Dam, connecting through Maiwand and so forth the Kandahar and Helmand security bubbles, while solidifying these, expanding these gains, complemented by Afghan local police in a number of the different areas. Here establishing an ever more difficult defense in depth for the Haqqani network in particular to try to penetrate as they try to get up to Kabul to carry out the attacks that I mentioned earlier. They will seek to undertake while expanding the security bubble here down through Logar and Wardak provinces. Out here making life difficult for any that try to find a safe haven, by the way, as an alternative to those in which they might be experiencing difficult times in the federally administered tribal areas of the border region of Pakistan. And then, again, solidifying gains here, expanding them, doing the same up here, and then doing some work in the Badghis and the Gormash area, including especially in Bala Murghab. So that gives you some sense of what it is that we're going to try to do. And again, your question was really about this area right here, and you can see what it is that we will seek to do there in particular.
General, thank you. Just one quick follow-up on that. I mean, that's the ring road, isn't it? I mean,
well, this right here is the ring road. Of course, the ring road has not been completed in this very, very challenging area over here, geographically challenging, extraordinary terrain. We have a fly-through on a computer. We did a very good discussion with the Minister of Finance the other day of that portion of the road and who could oversee doing that and how to carry that out. And it has obviously some strategic or some significant security challenges in some of those areas, though not all as well. But the rest of it is indeed the ring road, and that's the vital artery, of course, for Afghanistan, noting that there are some other important routes, but nothing as important as that one.
Thank you. Sir.
Hello, General. My name is Sean Lang.
Oh, no, Sean, can you just wait for a microphone? Just coming on your left-hand side.
Sorry to have the light in your eyes. This is part of the scheme. We set it up just for this time of day.
I'm used to having I was once a guest of the Haqqani network. They kidnapped me and took me to Bajor, and they would shine a light to my eye.
That's what they do. Well, I mean, who would think there'd be sunshine here in London now?
Go figure. General, I was just wondering, given Pakistan's pivotal role in, it's interesting looking at your cell there of, their pivotal role in supporting both Haqqani network and the Taliban Shura in Quetta, and providing safe havens up in Bajor and the rest of the tribal areas. And given that you're saying you only recently got the inputs right in Afghanistan, given that so far all the efforts by America have proved unsuccessful in weaning the ISI off their, from their support, I'm just wondering what different inputs can be put in now to perhaps create an ISI awakening, rather like you had in Iraq, which would prove successful, but so far nothing has. So I'm just wondering what the policy is there, and is there a danger that perhaps you could push Pakistan too far, and then they would be even more of a, or less of a reliable ally?
Well, thanks, actually. It's a great question, and as we typically look at this situation and you lay out, what are the potential challenges, the strategic risks and so forth, we generally identify as the most important strategic risks. One is one that President Karzai is very keen to work on, frankly, and that's just development of governmental capacity on the Afghan side so that there can be greater budget execution, more money can be put on budget rather than funneled directly in through PRTs and various international organizations, and it can make its way out to the provinces and districts and do good work for the Afghan people. But he recognizes that when it comes to spending the development budget in particular, as opposed to the piece which is salaries, which they do quite an admirable job in executing, that there does have to be additional capacity, and they have to streamline some of their processes as well. So that's one of them. The other one is, of course, the external sanctuaries. Now, let me provide some context for this, though, because I think you have to be absolutely fair and recognize what Pakistan has done over the course of the last 2 years. If I were here at this time 2 years ago, and I was the commander of Central Command at the time, of course, and we were looking with increasing concern at what was going on in what was then called the Northwest Frontier Province, is now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, as we saw Swat Valley come under increasing control by the Pakistani Taliban, the Tehrik-e Taliban Pakistani, and some of its affiliates, as we saw the various agencies of the federally administered tribal areas in Bajor, Moman, parts of Khyber. North and South Waziristan and so forth, Orakzai, again in the grip of the TTP and really threatening the very existence of Pakistan as its citizens knew it. We used to observe that the most pressing existential threat to Pakistan, indeed, was that posed by TTP and other like-minded organizations. And in the 2 years since then, the Pakistani Army, Frontier Corps, other military and security forces have conducted quite impressive counterinsurgency operations to clear and to hold and now to rebuild in Swat Valley, only to have so much of that frustrated by the terrible flooding this past year, but nonetheless have persisted and again have done very skillful work at considerable sacrifice, have lost several thousand soldiers during that time and a like number of civilians to barbaric attacks, again, by extremists in Pakistan, including in some of the settled areas. But they have carried out impressive work, again, in now Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, in Baijur. There's an ongoing operation in Moman. We're coordinating very closely. We have the best coordination I think we've ever had between ISAF, the Pakistani Army, and Afghan forces. I meet with General Kiani at least once a month. I've met him twice in the last 4 weeks alone to coordinate various operations so that if they are pushing against the TTP and they might come across the border into Kunar province, let's say, that we are waiting for them, and then vice versa with some of our operations there and some others down in the Baramshah area, for example, of Helmand province most recently. Beyond that, there has, of course, been a campaign against al-Qaeda in North Waziristan that has put enormous pressure on them, has had beyond a disruptive effect, has done a considerable amount to, if you will, to commence the dismantlement, really, of that organization and to force its most senior leaders to go even further underground than they already were, and to render them really incapable of responding in real time to activities around the world. And you only have to look at how typically untimely statements by Osama bin Laden are when there are fast-paced events ongoing in the Middle East, because they literally can't keep up with it. The way they have to communicate with him and get the word back out seems to take several weeks, during which time these messages are sometimes overtaken by events. Now, having said all that, there is no question that our Pakistani partners, and we, and certainly President Karzai, you saw in his speech yesterday, all recognize the need for further action against those who not only threaten the security in Pakistan, but also are causing significant problems for security in Afghanistan. And in terms of, what can lead to a change, I think that developments inside Afghanistan may be the most important lever. Think about the effect if there could be really widespread reintegration. You'd have a situation where the Taliban leaders, the Quetta Shura, will call up on their cell phone, or the operational commanders will, and no one answers. They get on their HF radio, and the guy at the other end says, "Hey, forget that. I've reintegrated. And oh, by the way, when are you going to come join us here and share some of the hardship and risk the way that leaders typically do in military organizations?" So that would be a very important dynamic, coupled with, of course, increased pressure on the Taliban, on the Haqqani network, on HIG, on the Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, and some of the others, each of whom have obviously been targets of the ongoing security operations in Afghanistan. And again, that will put increasing pressure on them. Recognize that, of course, this fighting season will begin with ISAF and Afghan forces having somewhere between 100 and 120,000 more forces on the ground, depending on when you want to stop the clock for comparison purposes, than were on the ground in the beginning of last fighting season. And the bulk of that increase, of course, is the increase in Afghan forces, which just in 2010, our calendar year alone, grew by some 70,000 or so, and have continued to grow. I think it's another 15,000 or so just since then. So that, I think, would be a description of the dynamics as we see them And certainly there's an enormous effort to work with our Pakistani partners. Needless to say, there was friction as a result of the case of the individual with diplomatic credentials, Davis. Hopefully we can take the rearview mirror off the bus with regard to that and focus forward now on the areas of mutual objectives and try to put some of that behind us.
Thank you. Sir, there's a microphone just coming from your left.
David Altaner from Bloomberg. In Libya, is Colonel Gaddafi a legitimate target for US and UK bombers?
David, thanks for a question about something other than Afghanistan, but with all due respect, I'll leave that to General Ham, to General Richards, the chiefs of defense staff who are carrying out the operations there. Not only is my half-life on life as Central Command long since expired for purposes of talking with journalists, there is no half-life on the area of African Command when it comes to me, so sorry.
Understood. Madam, lady over there.
But nice try.
We'll take some quick questions on this side and then we'll go to some grouped questions. Madam.
Hi, Erin Baker, Time Magazine. You've been talking about the reconciliation efforts and the backing by Karzai and, of course, the coalition. Do we have any evidence that there is an interest on high-ranking Taliban?
There have been responses, and this is beyond the imposter response of last year, which, by the way, was pretty well known at the time by those who were working that. There was a very low percentage given to the fact that he might be who he claimed to be, and so he was found out fairly quickly when there was something that actually seemed to be approaching seriousness. But there have been contacts, but I don't want to overstate them, and I obviously couldn't say with whom they've been in recent months.
Okay, Jonathan Steele.
Yes. Jonathan Steele, The Guardian. Really, to follow up on that reconciliation thing, the phrase is rather ambiguous in the way it's used. One version is the one that I think you've been putting forward this morning, which is to try and reintegrate people you call reconcilables, about getting individuals to come over. But it does look a little bit like asking them to surrender. The other option is what the British government did in Northern Ireland, which is to reach out to the political leadership of the insurgency, listen to their grievances, be willing to make political compromises, talk about ceasefires, and actually sign eventually an agreement. You seem to still believe, from what you're saying this morning, in military victory. Why are you against the idea of political compromise?
Well, with respect, Jonathan, I don't share that characterization at all. I have stated that we should absolutely seek reconciliation, and as you have described it. It should be Afghan-led, clearly, though. I mean, it has to be. This can't be something that NATO countries can do for Afghanistan. They might be able to help. They might be able to offer, their good offices or good services in some various ways. Different countries have some different capabilities in that regard. But no, I think exactly what you have described is what Secretary Clinton has supported in her most recent speech, what President Obama, what your Prime Minister and others have long supported as well, and even now I think with the idea of a, quote, diplomatic surge or, a political surge in that regard, and I am fully supportive of that. But again, there are different ways that you can reduce the number of combatants on the insurgent side, and reintegration is one that is providing some modest reductions already. It's still very early days, to be sure. I note that you stopped the shade just short of the individuals right there. I guess we want to keep them in the spotlight. But as I mentioned, some 700 or so. By the way, this is what actually was done in Iraq. Now, I hasten to say that my briefing to the Secretary of Defense back in September 2005 after doing the assessment included a PowerPoint slide that stated, Afghanistan does not equal Iraq, and listed all the differences. So you should be conscious that I'm keenly aware of those. But at the end of the day, what we did in Iraq was actually what we here describe reintegration in Afghanistan. It was essentially getting large swaths of the Sunni population and some of those who were tacitly or actively aiding and abetting al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then the same on the Shia side, not quite such large numbers. But remember that the Sons of Iraq ultimately included some 20 to 25,000 Shia, not just all Sunni individuals. And what that did was it took away the whatever popular support or assent or what have you existed for al-Qaeda and other Sunni extremist groups in the country. But we didn't actually reconcile with senior elements of al-Qaeda in Iraq or of Ansar al-Sunnah or some of the other groups, nor with, say, some of the organizations on the Shia, more extremist side of the Shia militia groups either. Although, again, the number of the rank and file and then populations certainly supported the new Iraq. And so I think there's some relevance to that here. But we have also said that, what the UK did in Northern Ireland is a very useful model indeed for addressing real and perceived grievances, sitting down and discussing how some of those might be accommodated. But as I stated earlier, this has to be Afghan-led. This cannot be ISAF, it cannot be individual countries leading this. They can help it, they can support it, but that's why there is a High Peace Council. And it has been quite active in its travel. I'm sure you know that they have met with various individuals in various locations outside Afghanistan. So I don't want to overstate that, but that is certainly how they see this going forward, and we are fully supportive of it. So again, I'd ask that you reconsider the characterization of COM-ISAF in your question there.
Okay, thank you. We'll take one more individual question, then we'll group a few together.
Hi, Duncan Gardner, security correspondent at The Telegraph. We've seen a recent video showing a British combatant in Afghanistan about a martyrdom video, so presumably somebody who died out fighting in Afghanistan. And I wondered whether you're now seeing more Westerners on the battlefield fighting for the Taliban in recent months and years.
I don't know that we have. I mean, there has always been a small number of Westerners who have gone to various training camps and so forth, extremist camps in the federally administered tribal areas and in North Waziristan in particular. And there have also been individuals who have gone to al-Qaeda camps, say in Yemen or in portions of Somalia or other locations as well, all of which illustrates why you have to put pressure on that entire extremist network. And people occasionally say, by the way, as an aside, well, what do you accomplish if you displace them from here if they go there? Well, they have been displaced from here. And when they're displaced, they lose the infrastructure, the contacts, the relationships, the command and control facilities, the information operations assets, all of this that they have established in some cases over a period of decades. And so that's quite significant. It's when the Taliban were cleared out of Jari and Panjwai districts, there's a reason that our weapons and explosive cache finds have gone up fourfold in the last 4 months. It's because we're in areas where they had to leave behind a great deal of kit and explosives and so on. But we have seen over the years, again, individuals go to these camps. I don't know whether I would characterize it as an increasing number or not, though. Again, there have always been individuals of dual citizenship, of backgrounds from various countries who have been attracted. I would say that the newer phenomenon is, of course, the use of the internet by individuals like Anwar al-Awlaki and the leader of al-Qaeda, or one of the leaders of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula there in Yemen, who, of course, was, is quite a fluent American English speaker, has some religious credentials in addition to an understanding of course, of Arabic and of the Arab culture. And so you have someone like that who can be, you know, in an extremist fashion, inspirational over the internet. And so I think some of them are using this new medium more effectively than they have in the past, and using it to attract and, you know, social media and so forth in new ways as well. And we do see efforts to try to exploit that to a greater extent.
Thank you. I want to group a few questions together now so that we can get some themes together. Julian Lewis, there's a microphone on its way there.
Hello, I'm Julian Lewis. I'm a member of the British Parliament, and I'm connected with the Centre for Defence Studies at King's College London. If you look at this from the point of view of the two sides that you wish to reach a compromise deal, as long as you have major fighting forces there, that is an incentive to the reconcilable Taliban to reach a deal and a disincentive to the Afghan government. When you set a deadline, as our Prime Minister has done, to the fighting forces' presence in Afghanistan, and President Obama does not intend the surge to go on forever, you reverse that, so you give an incentive to the government to reach a deal, but a disincentive to Taliban reconcilables to reach a deal, because they feel that if they do that, then the rug will be pulled out from under them. Can you see any role, even if only for a transitional period, to the establishment of a strategic base or bridgehead area somewhere in the region, so that when the drawdown comes, it doesn't mean total exit of fighting forces, it means their concentration in a sort of super garrison which would not interfere with the political water finding its own level, but which would give a warning to the Taliban side that a return to fostering international terrorism would not be tolerated but would be punished.
Mike, okay, let me actually take that. Sure. That's sufficiently, what do you call it, you know, dense or complex or what have you, that it deserves, I think, an answer. First of all, Joanne, I think you've laid out a wonderful example of sort of the tensions that you have between various incentives and disincentives, and I think it's an accurate depiction. And of course, what your leader here is trying to do, what President Obama is trying to do, is actually to address those, to confront them, if you will. That's why in President Obama's speech back on the 1st of December 2009 at my alma mater, West Point, he had both a message of urgency, which was never entirely understood in the context that it was offered, and a message of enormous additional commitment. You know, the message of commitment is 30,000 more U.S. forces, more civilians, more funding for Afghan forces, some additional authorities, and so on. And then on the message of urgency side, it was, but come July 2011, we will commence at a pace determined by conditions on the ground, the initiation of the responsible drawdown of the surge forces, which is something I will provide him options for and a recommendation, and we will implement. And indeed, I think that the progress, the very hard-fought progress, as fragile and reversible as it may be, has positioned us well, not only for the transition activities that President Karzai mentioned yesterday, but also to make the recommendation that I will make to him and the options that I will provide. Now, with respect to where you're headed with that question, I think there is work indeed going on that recognizes to a degree what you're getting at. And so even as there is now focus on 2014 much more than on the July 2011, as a result of the Lisbon summit in November last year, during which all of the leaders of the troop contributing nations and President Karzai and Yanama and the NATO Secretary General agreed that the objective should be transition of security lead to Afghan forces by the end of 2014. And that changed very dramatically the situation in the country, even out in some very sparsely populated villages. Within a week of return, by the way, they listened to BBC Pashto there, and I found that they understood completely what was the import of that particular decision taken. And now they're even looking beyond that. You will have heard that, again, President Obama and President Karzai have agreed to have discussions on a strategic partnership agreement or terms, something along those terms. And indeed, that initial talks have been conducted on that. There will be now the preparation of documents. NATO has also ongoing discussions on, again, a partnership agreement beyond 2014, and various national leaders. The Australian Prime Minister, I think, preeminent among them, have discussed the importance of a continuing relationship, albeit of a different character, different size, different magnitude, to support Afghanistan beyond 2014 as well. But as this is all done, I think that these, again, conflicting tensions, I don't think they're entirely mutually exclusive, but they do tend to pull a little bit in different directions, have to be kept in the forefront of our mind. Because there's no question that there are greater incentives for the Taliban to reintegrate and to reconcile if they feel that perhaps the momentum is slipping away from them on the battlefield and they're suffering increasing losses. But there, again, that could lead to perhaps a sense that progress perhaps is a little less of an imperative for some of our Afghan partners. I actually don't necessarily see that. I see increasingly, actually, President Karzai impatient for greater and greater exercise of sovereignty by the Afghan government. And this is why the private security contractors were such an issue for him. He saw the day when these would be competing as ISAF forces gradually draw down in the years ahead, that this would be competing with the legitimate Afghan security forces. He sees the provincial reconstruction teams as parallel institutions. This is understandable, and I think we do need to listen to him on this. And I think we haven't sufficiently in the past on that, and on a number of other topics, frankly, as Secretary Gates, I think, has argued quite persuasively. He sees these institutions, which some internationals see as providing basic services of enormous importance to the Afghan people, as competitors to the Afghan government. And he wants to develop this Afghan capacity. So you have to take some risk in that regard. You do have to put more money on budget, but then, of course, there has to be budget execution capability increased as well. So all of these kinds of issues, I think, are very much in the forefront of our mind as we are going about trying to shape, again, what this future azimuth looks like to 2014 and beyond.
I sense that Mark Pimer from Transparency International may have something related to transition arrangements. I'm just guessing, Mark. But
General, good morning. You've been very vocal on the issue of addressing corruption as one of the keys to ISAF mission success.
Where is he, by the way?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Sorry, thanks.
Including the setting up of the Shafafiyat task force. Mm-hmm. But there were very mixed signals, it seems, coming out of Kabul and the President's administration on how much this is supported. For example, the reticence on the Major Crimes Task Force. We would welcome your views on what's going well and what's going badly in this respect. Thank you.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, President Karzai absolutely agrees with our joint assessment, because again, General McMaster, with head of Task Force Shafafiyat, by the way, this is a civil-military coalition element. Co-director is a senior FBI officer, by the way, and he has senior Afghan partners from the Afghan National Security Council staff. And we've briefed President Karzai now, I think it's 3 or 4 times. The most recent was the day before I headed back first to Brussels and then to Washington. After one of these briefings, by the way, where he strongly agreed with, again, the seriousness of the threat posed by these criminal patronage networks, he fired the Afghan Surgeon General on the spot when he heard of the extraordinary, egregious, literally immoral activities that this individual was engaged in and had been engaged in for a number of years. And he followed up by firing the chain of command of the National Military Hospital. And he hung tough very much in the wake of that, when there was quite considerable political blowback from the factions with which this individual enjoyed a degree of political protection. We've discussed other similar networks in other segments of the Afghan society and economy that will have to be dealt with in the course of the months and years that lie ahead. He is very serious about it. He has also said he has instructed that we give no contracts to any members of his family. When we laid out one time that there was a potential debarment of a group in the Kandahar area, the Watan Risk Group, a holding company for a number of different organizations, none of which have Ahmed Wali Karzai as members of them, but certainly he is a friend, certainly, of a number of the individuals that run this. He absolutely supported, again, there's a process, you suspend and then ultimately you debar if the suspension period turns up that should be the course, and he absolutely supported it. So again, I think there is very clear evidence that he recognizes the severity of this. Certainly there are enormous challenges in some of these areas, how to come to grips with some of them, to be sure. And I think we do have to appreciate the realities with which President Karzai has to deal. The fact that even though the Constitution invests the President of Afghanistan with enormous powers, beyond just what we would know as the executive branch, but the appointment of provincial governors, the appointment of Supreme Court justices and other senior officials, the appointment of a third of the upper house and influence elsewhere, despite all that, he has to take a number of steps that I think we don't necessarily always appreciate. His administration does have to include segments of the political firmament, society, tribal groupings, and so forth, well beyond those that he's associated with. He's a Southern Pashto. That's just 42 or so % of the population. So he has a Northerner vice president, a former Northern Alliance senior member. They are also, former President Rabbani, the head of the High Peace Council. There's a reason there's a former, again, Northerner at the head of that, given that the Northerners will question any kinds of outreach to the Southerners, some of whom would like to see them crushed. He has to have there's a Shia component to the society, the Hazaras, so he has a Hazara second vice president. And again, I think he has to very carefully manage this, because that's what establishes the foundation he stands on when he exercises these powers that we see as very significant, but which are actually, I think, circumscribed a bit more than many would appreciate. And that's an element of this. Beyond that, I think there is, as I mentioned earlier, understandable and even increasing sensitivity to sovereignty. Again, over time, it's inevitable, no matter how hard you work to serve the people, to support the government, there is an accumulation of wrongs by those who are trying to carry that out. Again, it's inevitable. And you can try to extend, the half-life, if you will, of the era of good feeling through deserving deeds for, or good deeds for deserving members of the population. But again, it's difficult. And it was the same thing that John Kisley and I encountered in Iraq. I mean, there's a point beyond which, people get impatient with large numbers of foreign forces on their soil. And in Iraq, it was interesting, actually, because you find the same in Afghanistan to a considerable degree. And it's one of those, you know, do you want the Americans to stay? No, of course we don't. But don't leave too fast. You know, so you have that kind of sentiment and that kind of recognition. And even, again, understandably, I think, you know, a degree of, you know, gosh, you know, we have to depend on these folks. Again, Afghanistan does not have sufficient revenue generation, of course, to fund all of its own ministries and security forces and so forth. And so I think there are a lot of emotions there on top of all of this. But the political realities do need to be kept in mind, even as we do honestly think that there is a seriousness of purpose in going after these networks which otherwise will undermine, as I mentioned earlier, the very institutions to which we want to transition tasks in the years that lie ahead and between now and 2014.
Thank you. Caroline, there's a gentleman over there, and then Mike Codner. Caroline.
General, Caroline from McLeod, we met earlier. My husband's just spent 7 months with you. We all know that Afghanistan is a nation actually of young people. And what I wanted to ask you is, bearing in mind that the West never quite gets it right, quite frequently in these situations, in choosing or installing future leaders, bearing in mind that President Karzai is not going to be there forever, what are we doing about developing the future generation of politicians in Afghanistan? How are we sort of picking the successor generation, helping to develop them? And can you give us perhaps some hints as to people to look out for in the future?
Okay, and a gentleman over here, if you can just zip the microphone around.
John, the question. Andrew Dravinga, independent journalist. My question is, again, looking at the drawdown, how do you transition the COIN operation more towards Afghan forces, and particularly in terms of materiel? Rotorcraft, in terms of conducting deliberate operations, ISTAR provision, how much is retained? I went to a briefing in January in the States by AUSA. Of course, there's still about 50,000 US troops in Iraq and 240 helicopters. So what is the sort of leave-back element that you're expecting in Afghanistan?
Great. Yeah, Michael, let me probably stop there, because again, they're starting to get pretty divergent thoughts here, and I'm an infantryman. First of all, to Caroline, you should be, first of all, very, very proud of your favorite British brigadier. He did a magnificent job. It was wonderful to have him on the team. You, as I mentioned earlier, should be similarly proud of everybody who wears your country's uniform. Afghanistan is a nation of young people. There's no question about it. It shares that kind of demographic with many of the other countries in the region, indeed throughout the broader Middle East. And so investment in the future is important. Investment, therefore, in young people. Now, there are numerous components of the investments that are going on. The most basic would be the access to education. And in this regard, the Minister of Education of Afghanistan has estimated that this school year there will be 8.2 million Afghan students in basic schooling. This is an enormous increase over the less than 1 million that were in school under the Taliban, during which there were very, very few women, of course, and now there's some 37% of that 8.2 million actually are girls. There are similar investments in a host of different programs. ISAF actually supports Minister of, I think it's Youth and Sports and others that are actually seeking to foster the development of youth councils, of various athletic activities and others. We build facilities to support this in various locations as well, in addition to supporting the construction or repair, refurbishment of schools and of a variety of other educational infrastructure items. Beyond that, there are numerous programs for development, even in, if you will, in sort of the political concepts area. And you know, the various institutes from the United States, from other countries that are again fostering discussion of, in an Afghan context, democracy. What does it mean? How can it be exercised? How should responsible citizens participate, and so on. Again, very substantial programs that support that as well. The one area that I would probably offer a caution, and that would be about us picking. I think, frankly, that actually, as you noted, we probably should stay out of the picking business and allow that to be done by our Afghan partners. What we should be in is the business of helping to provide developmental opportunities. Again, in terms of education, in terms of discussions, and so forth. And there are also very substantial numbers of scholarships, I might add, that are provided to go to school in the U.S. and, by the way, in the U.K., Australia, a number of other countries are all providing these opportunities. And it is really heartening to see those individuals come back to Afghanistan now. We've been at this long enough that we're seeing individuals come back from these various universities, and to see the enormous capacity that they bring when they do return to their country. But we have to be cautious there that there are incentives for them to work in Afghan government. And we have to be very careful that we don't go down the road of, you know, you train the air traffic controller, he has to learn English to be an air traffic controller, and the next thing you know, he's an interpreter for a PRT instead of still in the air traffic control tower. So there are instances of this out there where various NGOs, international organizations, undoubtedly ISAF and others, are actually competing with the Afghan government for the very human capital that is most essential to the development of this new country. With respect to the other question, how do you transition operations to the Afghan security forces, noting that they still do not have what we term enablers. And enablers are a number of those items that you mentioned. It's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platforms. It's helicopters. It's medical evacuation. It is fixed-wing transport in some cases. It's fire support, close air support, and all the rest. And the answer is, of course, you help them develop the enablers. And I think they've got some 80 or so aircraft now, gradually growing. They're armored security vehicles that will be coming online during the course of this year. There's a mechanized brigade being trained. There's artillery now on the ground. We're helping them develop branch schools. I think there are 10 of 12 or 11 of 13 branch schools as of the latest count that have been established. There's a military academy. In fact, graduation was yesterday. This year there were more than four candidates for each slot in the military academy, very highly qualified candidates, so a huge pool. And by the way, they did the admissions process, the competition, by number rather than by name, so that there could be no intrusion. To come back to the question about corruption, you know, this is another area in which there was political patronage exercised, that those who got these really, you know, great opportunities that really provide them an advantage for the rest of their lives, in some cases in the past were getting them because of, again, some kind of connection rather than necessarily sheer ability. And this year it was a sheer ability. It was the best athlete concept, as we say. So needless to say, you help them develop enablers. Now, to some degree, there are some enablers that, you know, will be elusive for some time to come. And in those cases, as you have even in the case of Iraq, as you noted, the fact is that Iraq has over 700,000 Iraqi security force members. It has some very elite and very highly trained and experienced special operations forces, really the quality of special mission units. These are 2-2 SAS and Delta Force in their capability. But they don't have all of the enablers that actually make 2-2 and Delta the best in the world. And so we are providing some of those enablers still, and even as that comes down, as they gradually develop their own enablers in ways that make sense for them. But that's a country, of course, that has somewhere between $60 and $80 billion in oil revenue, maybe more now with the price of oil. And that is not something that Afghanistan has access to right now, although it does certainly truly have trillions, with an S on the end of it, trillions of dollars of minerals in the ground, if there can be the extractive technologies, human capital to operate it, value chains, transportation, and market deals made.
Thank you. Final question, sir.
Michael Codner from the Institute. General, I appreciate you may not wish to answer this question, but it will be very useful.
You always wonder when that kind of question starts.
A meeting we have in Paris tomorrow. Bearing in mind what you said earlier on about the closeness of the British-American relationship, military relationship, and its importance, and on the one hand, and the low profile, if I can put it that way, of the French military in Afghanistan, but of course also in Iraq. I just wondered what your view was of the British-French treaty, particularly insofar as there are implications for combined force structures, whether this is useful or indeed a diversion when it comes to rationalizing capabilities towards common purpose.
Michael, again, the way you started that question out, it led me to recall the old adage that when encountering minefields, it's best to go around them rather than through them. And to be truthful, the reason it's a minefield is because I just really don't know enough personally about the French and British agreement, although I've certainly talked to the Chads of both countries, and I must say that both of them are optimistic that there can be fruitful areas of cooperation and collaboration. And indeed, the ongoing operations may provide an example of what is possible in that regard. I would take slight issue with one item, and that is the French contribution in Afghanistan has increased. It is quite significant. It's in a tough area to the east of Kabul, and very important location for expanding the Kabul security bubble. It includes actually a district of Kabul, Surabhi district, the one district not transitioning, and then Kapisa province. They've had some tough fighting in there. They have increased their component in recent years, and they've actually done very, very good work, as they did, by the way, in the Balkans as well, where I was privileged to serve with them, both in the conventional force missions and in some of the war criminal hunt as well, also there together with Tutu and some others. So I think, again, that we do need to give them recognition for the important contribution that they are making there, while noting that clearly the British contribution is without question far and away the second largest and the most significant, I think, after the United States.
General, thank you. Reluctantly, I must draw it to a close there. The General is on his way back to Kabul today, straight after this meeting. I have to say that as an analytical institute, we always have a sort of happy talkometer, which records when we think we're hearing from officials or the military just happy talk about operations. And whenever the General speaks here, the needle stays at zero. It doesn't even shiver, because what you get with General Petraeus is both the strategic and the detail, and there isn't an element of happy talk in it. It is cruelly realistic. For that reason, is actually all the more optimistic, because I think what we get is the picture as the General sees it, and that is a picture with quite a lot of encouragement in it. But as I think we said at the beginning, none of this can be taken for granted. Counterinsurgency is difficult all the time. However, I think that's also, as an analytical institute, we try and do our bit in understanding these issues and in talking about them. But of course, as individuals, we sit here comfortably in London while the General and his warriors do the job in Afghanistan, and it leaves us with little more to offer than a prayer for the weak and a cheer for the brave. Nevertheless, we offer prayers and cheers for all the work that's going on in Afghanistan. Your Royal Highness, it's always a great pleasure to have you here, sir, as our President. I'm very pleased that you're able to make it today. And General, it's always a special day for us when you're able to pass through, give us an update, and give us a sense of the direction of the operation. And sir, you're always very, very welcome here. And on behalf of the Institute, we wish you well with you and all your staff for the work that you're doing on behalf of us all. General, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, as always. You must get straight up.